Okay, we're just going to take a couple of these. The first one I'd like you to think about. Me with doler la cabeza, de vez en cuando, one of our new adverb phrases, de vez en cuando, every once in a while, every now and then. To me, that indicates repetition, that's something that happened every now and then. It was repetitive over time, ongoing. So I would use the imperfect to describe something that is ongoing, like having a headache. So me dolía la cabeza de vez en cuando. Me dolía la cabeza. I only have one head, so I'm going to use the singular form of that. Me dolía la cabeza. The next one has a really key phrase in it. Tell me what the key phrase is. Ayer por la tarde. Exactamente. So notice that since something happened yesterday afternoon, it's done, it's over. So I would use preterite in the second one. Tú tuviste un gran dolor de cabeza ayer por la tarde. Now, compare the first and the second one. Do you see there's a distinction in time there between the first one that was ongoing, repetitive, over and over again, every now and then, over and over and over again, versus the second one that happened just once and done, over. So, tuviste un gran dolor de cabeza. The next one I want to talk about is the one that starts with la niña. Estar mareada, to be dizzy, nauseous, en el bote, in the boat, porque no querer sentarse. Now, the girl was dizzy, she was nauseous. A descriptive, right? La niña estaba mareada en el bote. Now, I'm going to argue, that's my first choice, I'm going to tell you. My second choice, however, would be la niña estuvo mareada en el bote. Let me tell you what that would mean. Has anybody been in a boat where they just all of a sudden had this wave of nausea come upon them, and it happened suddenly? Just came upon them. I have had that happen to me, I'm going to tell you. So in that case, if that's what you're trying to communicate, la niña estuvo mareada en el bote, I could see either of those happening. My first inclination would be, okay, that looks like a describing kind of phrase. I would use estaba first case. To describe something that's a little bit different than that, la niña estuvo mareada, this wave of nausea just came upon her. Okay? Now, how about the second part? Porque no querer sentarse. Querer means to want, right? Porque no quería sentarse. She didn't want to sit down. No quería. It's an emotion. It's happens inside. There's no action that I can see when somebody wanted to sit down. However, think back to our last vocab. What did querer mean in the preterite? When you put that in the preterite, when you use it in the quiso form. Yep, it meant she refused to sit down. No querer. She refused. No quiso sentarse. So which one is it? Did she not want to sit down, or did she refuse to sit down? I don't know. It's in the mind of the speaker, whatever the speaker is trying to communicate. So if the speaker is trying to communicate that she just simply didn't want to sit down, no quería sentarse. If the speaker is trying to communicate that she refused, absolutely refused, people were telling her all over the place, sit down, you don't look good, you're starting to turn green, then no quiso sentarse. There was very much action going on around it, and it wasn't just in her head. So all of that to say, you're thinking now, I know what you're thinking, you're like, oh my gosh, it could be either all the time. No, not all the time. There are certain instances where I could see it go one way or the other. On the examen, I am going to try my best to not give you opportunities to have that be the case, to have it be, oh, it could be this, could be that. There's many times where it cannot be. The last one, for example, anoche. Anoche me dolió el estómago mucho. It happened last night. That's it. It's done. Anoche tells me that it has to be in the preterite because it happened once. It's done. It's over. Anoche me dolió el estómago mucho. Y casi, one of our new adverbs as well, almost, casi vomité. Vomité, dolió. Both of those in the preterite, very specifically in the preterite because of the anoche that you see there. All right, next slide. ¿Cómo es el examen parcial número 2? I had to delete this whole slide and replace it with something new. Let me just tell you what you can expect, and I will give you more information as we get closer. Because these are unusual circumstances, I'm going to use the VHL testing capabilities that I have, the assessments that are available there. There will not be any specific cultural components as there were in the last one, just because these tests don't include that. So it just is what it is for this particular time. I will choose 3 of the assessments that come from Panorama. 2 from Lección 9, 1 from Lección 10. I will give you a maximum of 30 minutes to take those tests. So the test will close down after 30 minutes. It will be timed out. You will have from the whole day, that viernes, you'll have the whole day to take those 3 mini tests. You don't have to take them one right after the other. I mean, probably a good idea to do that, but you probably don't have to, as long as they're completed by midnight on el viernes. Yeah, you'll have to complete each of those tests in the 30-minute time window that you are given. I will set that parameter when I assign those. Of course, no notes, no vocabulary are to be used. I really hope that you will respect the integrity of the course and that you will hold to that. I have no way of knowing, but I am just asking you to do that. That's a typo. They will look much like other Panorama activities that you've done for homework before. I will give you a very specific directions about the test, though, next week, so you can prepare. The best way to prepare, I would say, would just be doing some of the practice activities. I have assigned a lot of those on Panorama, but not all of them. So it would be a good idea to maybe go back and redo some that you've done before, and then to do some that I haven't maybe assigned as just another practice. So it's yours. You purchased it for a lot of money, so go back and use them how you want. Use them to prepare yourself for this examen. More info to come. Okay, next slide. I started by talking about this little impersonal se that we're going to be talking about today. That little word that we've used before with reflexive verbs, like I said, se ducha, se maquilla, se va, se despierta, se levanta, all of those kinds of things. This, however, has nothing to do with it. It is more of what it's called here, an impersonal se. Well, what does that mean? Here's an example. Se habla español en Costa Rica. If I were to say that in English to you, I would say this perhaps. Spanish is spoken in Costa Rica. Se habla español en Costa Rica. Here's another example. Se puede leer en la sala de espera. English, it might sound like this. People can read in the waiting room, or one can read, or you can read in the waiting room. Who specifically can read in the waiting room? People, right? People in general. Who specifically speaks Spanish in Costa Rica? Does anybody know anyone in Costa Rica? Well, I do happen to know some people. However, the idea is not the person who's doing this. It's just the fact that Spanish is spoken. Reading can be done. Okay, next example. Se hacen operaciones aquí. They perform operations here. Operations are performed here. Who's performing the operations? I don't know. Do you see what's going on here? The person who's doing this is irrelevant. We don't really care who is speaking, who can read, and who is doing the operations. Well, I do care who's doing the operations. I'm hoping it's a doctor. But the fact that operations are done, reading can be, one can read. Spanish is spoken. The person is out of the equation. We don't really care who that is. There's a few more examples. Se necesitan medicinas enseguida, right away is enseguida. So medicines are needed right away. Notice another thing that's going on. These are kind of backwards in English. Did you see that? Medicines are needed versus se necesitan medicinas. We start with the se necesitan and we finish with medicinas. Spanish is spoken. Do you see how it's backwards there? Se habla español en Costa Rica. Another example, and you've seen this phrase before, ¿cómo se dice? ¿Cómo se dice skirt in español? How does one say this? How does a person say this? ¿Cómo se dice skirt? So what's happening here is the action is being, the person who's performing the action isn't defined. We don't know. That's why it's called the impersonal say. We're taking the person out of the equation. The other thing I want you to notice is, notice the verbs there. Habla, puede, hacen, necesitan, and then back to dice. When the N is added, notice what is the common thing that both of those two sentences have in them. The fact that operaciones, medicinas are plural. Did you notice that? So that's why the plural form is used. Se hacen operaciones. So here's my only other little trick with this. That Spanish is, so that the singular verb that you use, habla, puede, in se habla español, como se dice skirt, singular things like skirt, español, leer, and then when there's plural things like operaciones and medicinas, then we add the N. And that's not it's not a novel concept because we've done that with gustar, right? Me gusta, te gustan. We've done that with an N or without the N, depending on whether it's singular or plural. So where do you see this in real life? Well, we see it when things are being advertised or there's directions given to the general public. The person doing these things, I don't know who it is. So, se prohíbe fumar. In English, it would go backwards, right? That sign would read backwards. It would say smoking is prohibited. Se prohíbe fumar. Take a look at that word prohíbe for a second. It's the one last vocab word that I had not covered yet, that verb prohibir, to prohibit. It's on the top middle box of verbs, and I said, hang on, we'll get back to that verb, and this is where it is. So it's oftentimes in signage. Parking is prohibited. Se prohíbe estacionar, o aparcamiento. Do notice on prohíbe, too, that the accent is on the I of prohíbe. So when you're asked to do some things on Panorama, notice that that's going to be an accented letter, prohíbe. I open the newspaper and I see an advertisement that a certain company is seeking or needing programmers. There's the next one. Se necesitan programadores. Programmers are needed. Smoking is prohibited. Do you see how programadores are plural? I need the N of necesitan. Fumar is just one activity, so se prohíbe fumar. The bottom two are actually signs that I found on Google Images somewhere that you would find on a store or inside of a store. Se vende pollo. In that particular store, again in English, go backwards. Chicken is sold. Se vende pollo. And near the cash register, you would find the sign that's to the right. Se aceptan tarjetas de crédito y débito. It would read backwards in English. Credit and debit cards, plural, are accepted. So there's the N that you see at the end of that. All right, next slide. Let's take a look at this. How would you fill in this particular sentence then? Se vende o venden. Those are my only two choices. Okay. Ropa and Bloomingdale's. Okay. I personally don't know anyone who works at a Bloomingdale's. I'm not sure if any of you do. Even if anybody does, it doesn't matter. We don't really care who's doing the selling, thus the impersonal nature of that, right? So we don't really care who's selling the clothing at Bloomingdale's. All we're interested in the fact that clothing is sold. So my only choices are se vende or se venden, and we're going to choose se vende because ropa is singular. Okay, I'm gonna stop it. It's gonna time out for 15 minutes, but I would like you to go through the rest of them. And